name is Eric Allen. I am the associate chair, so I'm the chair over game design and motion graphics here at SCAD Atlanta, and I do want to thank the GGDA, and I also want to thank SCAD for housing this, and for we're excited to be just hosting this event, but we are here to talk about GDC. So first off, let's go with introductions. You want to say your name and what you're about?
Testing. Okay, works. My name is Cody Fletcher. I'm a grad student at SCAD Atlanta. I focus on game design and game scripting, computer science background, mostly programming focus, and I am doing research on my thesis to reducing VR sickness, most recent project, I suppose.
Hello. Testing, there we go. Hello, my name is Erich Schuler. I work in communications and marketing, and with a focus on games and entertainment. And over the years, I've had the pleasure of supporting launches for titles like Pokémon Sleep, Pokémon Scarlet and Violet, and the Super Mario Brothers movie. Yeah, and I've been in the industry for around 8 years now. And I'll dive more into that as we talk about GDC.
Hi everyone, my name is Claire Combs and I am a senior here at SCAD Atlanta. I am more focused on the art side and especially prop and environment art.
And Wes, we're going to relocate you to the center. You're the middleman. Don't get too far away from each other. We're doing this to keep you all in the same shot.
This one.
Yeah, and I arrived late, so I get the tardy person center seat, being punished. So yeah, I'm Wes. I work in a company called Cybever, and my title is Director of Creation. We work on AI game development tools. I've also worked in transmedia, working with a lot of properties like Peanuts, Garfield. Worked on the video game Hawken not too long ago as a first-person mech-based shooter, and I brought some toys.
Woo-hoo! Yeah!
Wow.
So I also have
We
a
love
company
toys.
doing kind of like art toys for the game Terraria. This is like just a personal hobby project. When I get bored, I start companies. So this is the Druid.
Are these official products?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm a Jewish man!
That's
Yeah!
cool.
There we go.
That's cool.
So this was like a pandemic project. I got bored and started a company. So there we go.
Awesome.
All right, so thank you. So let's first gauge how GDC went for you all. So give me, let's say, 2 words that describe your GDC experience. Go ahead, Cody.
Okay, 2 words. Enlightening is one of them. Enlightening plus, I don't know.
I didn't prep them with this question.
I mean, in general, it was pretty good. There's a lot of really good information, I think, is what I got a lot out of it. There's a lot of talks to go to. I tended to focus a lot more on a lot of industry, like kind of on the outskirts of industry. I did like external development talks, and I went to a little bit of Unreal stuff and a portfolio one that I think was pretty useful, especially for students in here as well, what industry kind of looks for in portfolios for game design and what it's looking like right now. And I think that stuff is really interesting. And lots of little tidbits here and there.
Awesome. Okay. Wes?
Yeah, I would say the general takeaway for me was that, if I boil it down to 2 words, like an inspiring creativity, there was a lot of like an indie vibe with a lot of the people that I met with. I think we're going to see a lot of small studios coming together. There was a lot, I think, of also disappointment in the expense and the feeling of an upsell in the industry from the business side. So I think there's going to be some backlash to that. So yeah, those two feelings sort of clashing, I think.
I think GDC for me was, I think the words I'll be picking will be more based on personal experience then general observation, for me, it was a very, one word would be successful event. I had very clear goals for why I was attending GDC, and I felt like I've accomplished those goals. Just to briefly recap what those are, is I wanted to reconnect with people I worked with, I wanted to build new relationships, and I wanted to discover new opportunities in the marketing and communication space. And I felt like I've accomplished all that when I went to GDC this year. The other word I would use is probably validating. Being among my peers, it made me realize how much I had to bring to the table and how valuable my experience was throughout the years. And it was just nice to be on other communications professionals, meeting other marketing professionals, and just learning that I do have a valuable skill set that companies are looking for. And I can dive into that more later.
Nice. The first word I would use would be jam-packed. There's so many different things to see, from like going to all the panels that are scheduled back to back to back, to just exploring all the different booths and meeting all the different people. I couldn't get to do everything that I wanted, but I ended up doing a lot. My second word would be adventurous, because it really was an adventure, just going in and doing things that you didn't plan to do, meeting people and saying, oh yeah, come to this event later, or come to this mixer, and then showing up and finding opportunities and people you never thought you would have met.
Okay, great. I noticed that it was interesting. I mean, usually there are haptics companies. There were a lot of motion capture companies I saw this year. What were some of
Wait, what were your 2 words?
Oh, what were my 2 words?
You don't get away with that.
That's so mean, Andrew. Okay, so I'm the moderator here.
You've been to more than any of them. Well, maybe not.
Pleasantly surprised.
There we go.
Yeah. So like, I think the elephant in the room for all of us is that the games industry is going through like this, the big AAAs are going through this kind of tightening phase right now. And that's for a number of reasons. I feel some of it is post-pandemic capital, and others are, I think what's happening is these bigger companies are starting to diversify out to the smaller companies. And that's something that we saw in the film industry about 20 years ago. And so it's happening now in the games industry. And what's interesting is I had a lot of companies coming to me asking for students to work for them, like smaller companies that are under the bigger umbrella companies like Virtuos or Keywords. And so I think that's why I was pleasantly surprised, because I was going to GDC to see what that landscape looked like, and that was what I had thought of. But anyway, okay. So my next question is, what did you see at GDC that really stood out to you? And that could be from a technology, like some hardware advancement or software advancement, something that was either offered or something that you learned at GDC that really was exciting for you.
You kind of mentioned already the mocap stuff. There were a lot of mocap companies their big selling point was doing away with the mocap suit. A lot of real-time camera tracking. The one I saw that particularly stood out to me was the one where it was just a set of like essentially just GoPros set around, and it was like you can capture mocapped animation without a suit with just those set of cameras. And they had a game set up where it was like a fighting game where they had hit detection on just like kind of shadow boxing each other, which was kind of funny. But the big sell for it is like all of these animations can just be saved and then dumped into an engine and then do that, and you can just that was a big selling point. And there were a lot of companies doing different versions of that, so the mocap technology has gotten quite exciting there. There were a lot of AI companies. I have my opinions about that, but there are a lot of interesting services. A lot of services like offering like audio recognition through just voice files, and A lot of workflow management kind of businessy stuff that I see that I didn't, there's just too many to count really. So that's definitely a big space in the industry that is worth looking at, because it's everywhere. This is probably the first GDC that you really see it out in droves, honestly, nowadays. So those are the first things that I can immediately think of.
Yeah, I would say more than a specific technology that stood out to me, it was more of kind of a trend in how teams were approaching development and kind of in embracing doing more with less, and not even necessarily going after the hot new technology, which was strange for me because with my day job I was wearing like an AI tools hat, but the most impressive package that I saw there was a development tool that was kind of an end-to-end development shortcut solution that wasn't using any AI. It was using sort of more procedural, but was using it in really clever ways and packaging collaborative technologies in ways that were just really powerful. And also, seeing teams come together and with a willingness to collaborate. That was a big trend that I was seeing, and seeing a willingness to sort of like push together without kind of a AAA aesthetic as being the goal, but with more of a design aesthetic that was more creative focused and less technology focused. And that was really impressive to me, and I saw that with a lot of teams kind of like back to back in meetings that I was in. And that's more trend based than technology based, and more creative and artistic on that side. And I saw that over and over during GDC.
I think I also observed a similar trend. On top of that, I think there were a lot of, there was a reoccurring thread in a lot of conversations in how studios were treating accessibility and advocacy, at least among the circles I was with, that I noticed was a very interesting topic that kept being brought up over and over again. I do think, like, obviously the elephant in the room is more like, the employment situation for certain people. We're dealing with an unusual amount of layoffs in our industry, and I think this really shaped GDC this year and affected sort of the energy. It felt a little bit more low-key this year, but at the same time, I noticed how it highlighted how deeply people still cared about our industry, and there was a shared sentiment that we're still here and committed to building a better and more sustainable industry, which I think is related to what you were seeing as well. Obviously, I also saw a lot of AI. AI was a big trend this year. I feel like every GDC there's some sort of trending thing, and AI is the one this year. But I did attend one AI talk that explored how recruiters and job seekers were using AI, not just for efficiency, but also how they present them, like how people present themselves, evaluate candidates, and tailor communication. And I thought it was interesting to see both the opportunities and the ethical considerations being discussed in that space. Obviously, it's a hot topic, and I was very curious to see how that was shaping the hiring space, since I was exploring that with my own journey at the moment. But yeah, those were the trends I've noticed personally.
What stuck out to me most was probably all of the AI, the different systems. Especially, I attended the Meshy AI panel where they were showing off how their specific brand of AI can make 3D models very quickly, and now they can have good topology. And they brought up some interesting points. Obviously, I don't like it because it's taking my job, but they brought up good points about how an art director could use it for more of a personal game that they're making, to be the director, create the props that they maybe don't want to spend like a day making a table over and over and over, or a rock. And I think they have some valid points that could be used to make a game more efficient, but I do fear that the update they were saying is coming out next is definitely going to be dangerous for a lot of people in the art pipeline.
Okay, so, and just my 2 cents there. With AI, I think that AI is going to be a great companion as we move forward, And I do think that AI is eating into a couple portions of the workflow, right? It's eating into that initial like concept and some of the creative workflow, but it's also eating into the back end where we're, that back end programming side of things, right? And so we're seeing AI take over some of that, right? So some of you have been coding with AI doing your bug fixes, right? And some of you have probably used AI for concepting already, right, in our classes, within constraints. But at that same time, where are we going to be working with AI as a companion? That's the question. And how are we going to be utilizing that wave that's coming? And I would recommend thinking about, innovative systems. How are we going to control that tool that is AI, right? That's how we need to look at it, as opposed to being scared of it. So
I
how
agree
do we
with
how do we
that.
utilize it?
Yeah, I agree with that. And that's something I actually wrote down on my notes from GDC as well, was the discussions I saw around it. It wasn't being hyped as a replacement for creative work. It was more like a support system. And like trying to learn how to use it as a versatile tool for problem solving across departments, and I feel like that's what a lot of the discussions around AI at GDC were about this year. It was just trying to figure out how can we use this tool to support our work, not to replace it.
I think it's also worth mentioning that it's pretty important to read the room if you're at GDC talking about AI to a room full of programmers and artists being like, we're replacing everything. Yeah, so I definitely think that's a big part of that tone is like, well, it's a companion. We're not replacing the job. I'm saying I'm replacing your job to your face. But I honestly think that the best use of AI, like I've gone back and forth on it. I'm kind of in the middle on like, I'm not going to be a doomer about it because clearly it's a very useful tool, but I also definitely don't think it replaces anything. But I think what its biggest strength is it's a gap filler. It's like if you are not an artist, for instance, if you are not a 3D modeler and you need to prototype, normally you would need to find someone who can do that on every aspect of that process. You have to do it on iteration, you have to do that for final product, you have to do that for all of that. AI lets you fill in gaps on a low-grade gap filler for things that you're not in expertise on. That gap filler content should not be final product because in general, it's usually not good enough for final product. And when it gets past as final product, it ends up being noticed and scrutinized pretty heavily. But like, what it's really good for is like if you use Meshy to make a model to get something started, to get iteration, and then you have something to start from to then commission someone to then make something out of that's useful for someone like me who is a programmer and not a 3D artist. And vice versa, even people who don't program but have a big artistic vision, you can fill in, you can do some rudimentary programming with AI to make something happen. Now it's probably not going to be good enough for a full game, or at least you're probably going to run into some problems if you try to do an entire architecture based on just AI alone. Trust me, I've seen it. But you can't say it doesn't help for sure.
As a writer and a strategist, it's a similar process. Like it's great for ideation, but don't allow it to be the final say. Always, double check what it is giving you and make sure, it is accurate and fulfilling what you intended to do with that work.
Yeah, basically, never forget that it's an aggregate. All language learning models is an aggregate of information, is giving you the average of all of its data sets. So as a creative and as an artist, you ask yourself the question when you're using AI, do I want an average? Do I want an aggregate? And if so, then maybe it's a good idea. But I would hazard to guess for most final product, you're not looking for like the general midpoint for anything that you're making. Which is why it falls apart when you want to use it for final product. So it's a good question to ask yourself.
That's awesome.
I'll say I work a lot with the developer relations side, and from working with either sole devs or indie devs or mid-sized devs, what they're using, especially Gen AI with 3D assets is for blockouts and for prototypes or for mechanical proof of concept. and they're using that for level design to get to the next milestone, to get to the next funding milestone. They're using it for that. They're not using it for anything that's on screen for final, anything that a player would see. They're not using it for final on-screen assets. And all of that is meant to be replaced by actual artist-produced assets that can be ownable, and it's ownable IP that's copyrightable, or that's within their clients or their own protectable IP set that's something that they would own that's part of their IP.
I think it's also worth considering that if you look at this, I think we're all familiar with the instances of AAA companies being accused of final products being AI, and that's bad. But I think honestly, a big part of what makes that happen is even so much the AI, it's the culture around a lot of the AAA industry up until this point of being very, very pushed to crunch, very pushed to hit deadlines in such a breakneck pace that it becomes impossible to do anything else. And then a tool like AI comes around, and maybe by design it's supposed to be prototype, it's supposed to be just proof of concept, but when you're in a giant pipeline like that that is only ever incentivizing constant growth and constant breakneck pace, of course it's going to go through. Like, any human is going to end up with final product and in production that way. And I think that the fact that that's happened that way, it's more of a symptom of like the way that we do large scale development, actually. And it asks some questions about that, for like, why has this become a tool that becomes acceptable? Because the goals are maybe not what we would want them to be.
Okay, all right, this is turning into an AI discussion. So,
You asked the question.
I know, I did ask the question. All right, Claire, so how was it to show off your game at GDC? And let me ask that question first, and then what would you, as a follow-up question, what would you have chosen, or like what advice would you give yourself like a month ago as you were preparing, now that you've been through it?
I mean, it was very exciting. Because we were split up into like shifts working at the booth, I wish I was there for longer than my shift, because just at the time I was given, I only got to meet so many people, and the people I did meet were great, but I wish I could have met everyone that saw our game to show it off. It was very amazing to get other people's opinions. I feel like working at SCAD, sometimes you can get caught in a little circle of like, yes and, yes and, yes and, because it's a small community. But then having someone from across the country, or maybe a different country, come in and say, oh, maybe you could change this part, or maybe this would work better, is very, very useful. So if you treat it as almost like a play test, I think that works out very well. What I would have done better with hindsight is probably just more bug fixing. You can never bug fix enough. There'll always be a bug, most likely. But just making sure that we don't get into time crunches and trying to make the game as best as it can be.
Okay, so our industry pros here. So kind of same question, less about the senior studio game, but more about like looking at how GDC changed a little bit with Unreal and Unity. Unreal's now, we'll see if they're going to Unreal Fest or not, how that's going to work out. But it was interesting. The floor was just a little bit different because Unreal, their behemoth wasn't there.
Yeah.
But that did give way for other big companies to step in. So Meta had a huge presence, and Tencent was massive. So
Discord, surprisingly.
Yeah, Discord, that's right. And Meshi was big. I mean, there were a lot of, So, what advice would you give to other professionals that are heading to GDC?
I can get started on this. I think GDC is what you make of it. I've been to, I'm sure everyone here has been to several GDCs, but after a while, I started thinking like, what do I really want to achieve with GDC? And I feel like you shouldn't go in trying to do everything. There's just too much to do at GDC. And I feel like that you're going to get the most out of GDC if you go in with a focus. You know, find out what do you want to learn, who do you hope to meet, and where do you want to grow. And if you can define those goals before you go to GDC, then I think you're going to set yourself up for a successful GDC. And you know, don't underestimate the power of a genuine connection as well. You know, some of the best conversations I had were not at big, you know, sessions or big talks. They happened in the hallway, or they happened like over lunch. You know, it's not during these big pitch moments. It's more of the sincere moments where you're going to really find like the most rewarding connections. So keep that in mind, and you know, make sure you know, give yourself some grace. You know, don't feel like you have to attend every party. You have to go to every networking event. I think it's even better if you can sort of figure out, like, hone in on, you know, go deep instead of wide. Like, you know, really figure out what your goals are, what you want to focus on. Like for me personally, I prioritize going to a communications mixer versus going to GDC nights, which was some new nighttime event that GDC wanted to do this year. And I found that very rewarding because I got to connect with other peers in my field. So that would be my advice.
Yeah, my focus at the show is more on the business side, so I usually try to have the bulk of my meetings set up before I go. And most of that takes place in hotel lobbies. And the only reason I get a badge, I mean, I spent maybe 2 hours total on the show floor, and I only had a badge for show floor access. I didn't go to the GDC nights, I didn't do any of the other stuff. It's disappointing to me that GDC upsells every tier. So you pay hundreds of dollars for the GDC show floor badge, and then everything else that you want to do is another set of additional charges on top of that. So if you want to go to the indie parties, that's a separate set of charges. And if you want to go to GDC nights, it's 3 more nights of extra charges. And I didn't do any of that because, you know, everything takes place at the hotel lobbies. So for me, the only reason to even do the exhibits is to kind of get a feel for what the industry's up to, and also to connect with old colleagues that if I don't have a reason to meet somebody at Meta, then I can run into them at their booth, and I can just casually bump into them and meet them, and if they have time for lunch, that's great. If they don't, that's great too. But I'm not taking up a schedule slot that's valuable at GDC. And you know, one trend that I saw that was interesting to me, kind of being from this world before, from the XDev services world, is seeing some of those slots from the NVIDIAs of the world that weren't exhibiting in a major way, seeing that taken up by people like Keywords and PTW. Now they've rebranded as Side, and Dicko had a big presence, and some of the big TransPerfect had a big presence there. I know they have an office here in Atlanta. And they just took on Technicolor's game dev group, since they're having trouble right now. And to see like the big, you know, billion-dollar external development teams have a huge presence at GDC was kind of surprising to me, because they usually take more of a backseat to the NVIDIAs of the world who kind of run the show there. Now it was like the year of the XDev studios, which was interesting to see.
Yeah, yeah. Like a lot of the talks that I ended up going to, in a convention where everyone is advertising to you, I feel like it is important to remember that, for me anyway, I want to find my peers, which are typically the indie folks, and I went to a lot of talks that were on the expo floor, but as you say, they're external developers, which is part of the industry that doesn't even really get talked about all that much, like in the main discourse of things, because even with the imminent collapse of the AAA industry, and I'm being very dramatic about that, but the external developers are a little bit more stable because of the fact that they're mostly contract-based, and you are working on a lot of bigger games, but contracted from AAA studios. And also, with the mass layoffs and the way things are for internal developers, a lot of those people end up just into external development, and they end up outsourcing more. So your work, in a weird way, you get more work, And it doesn't matter if the game works out or not, because you're paid based on contract. So it's a pretty good deal as far as this industry is concerned. But I particularly was very struck by that kind of weird elephant in the room, where like even at this expo showroom floor, shiny swag, they still like have to acknowledge, yeah, it's rough out here. And that's a lot coming from a panelist at GDC. And like I went to a talk that was entirely themed. It was like 20 people was there. It was kind of in the back, and it was in an ex-industry. She had worked for like 35 years in industry, and it was a talk entirely designed around how to break up with your company.
I went to that talk.
I love that talk.
It was good.
It was kind of it wasn't like maybe the most popular talk in the world, but it spoke to me. I thought it spoke a lot about where we are right now, where it's like we could have a whole panel discussion about like, okay, so how do we know when to jump ship? Everyone needs that skill. But
that wasn't the only talk like that too. There were a lot of talks like around that idea at GDC this year.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like you literally just couldn't ignore it. And honestly, in the midst of all of that, it's very, I think, refreshing in some ways that there are people that can be real about that even in the midst of all of this. Because I also had problems with the upcharging of GDC. God, like $1,000 to upgrade your pass from Expo to Core, and that's rough, because a lot of the Core Pass stuff, like from a game design perspective, are like a lot of industry folks talking about the solutions that they found in games that they worked on. Pretty huge networking opportunity, I would say. I would want to talk to those guys, but all of that's gate kept because they're not sponsored content. And I know that's the world we live in, but you know, it's expensive, yo. Like,
you reminded me that a big takeaway that I got from GDC this year is people just seemed way more authentic, you know, with their and more intentional with their connections. And I actually really appreciated that this year, you know, having like just, you know, some real like down to earth conversations and talking about, you know, like the realities of working in the industry. I really appreciated having that just being up front and center, and that was refreshing for me.
Yeah, and just to the point of like, I know we're talking about some of the rough patches of what we're going through in the industry, but I'm sure that most of you probably know somebody who has an internship at a fairly big studio, and we have multiple internships that are happening in, you know, from SCAD students, and so I think it's kind of healthy. It's weird, but it's not like everything is shut down. So, I'm just saying that because I'm seeing companies looking at you all as students as in a very favorable light right now. So don't underestimate a studio's ability to pick you out of school because of where you are in your knowledge base. From my standpoint, it's actually pretty healthy. Okay, so now since we have you experts here, let's talk a little bit about, I'd like to just capitalize on your backgrounds just for a minute. So, Eric, do you want to talk a little bit about how the students or professionals what are your thoughts on the way that they can help market their games as they either leave school or they maybe are publishing their game for the first time?
Okay, yeah. So
the current landscape.
Yeah, the current landscape, obviously, social media, everyone, you know, that's at top of mind. You need visibility, right? When you have a brand new game, the number one thing you need is visibility, getting more people to discover your game so they can talk, you know, do word of mouth, ideally, and obviously play your game, right? And those are the goals you need. And usually social media is the go-to, right? You know, it's available, it's usually free, you know, unless you are fortunate enough to have a budget to do ads. That's a different talk. Obviously, the hot new trend in social media right now is short-form video content. So I feel like if you are aiming to promote your game, you need to master short form video content and learn how to utilize TikTok, Instagram, YouTube Shorts. I think you're gonna get the most mileage with social media strategy if you go that approach. I would, obviously, we're in a time where, you know, social media can be considered a little unstable, like everything that's going on with Twitter and the mass exodus of game developers from Twitter, right? So, but I think with that in mind, you just need to learn to be adaptable. You know, just because, you know, Twitter's still a good resource, and I would still use it. You can still get like a lot of reach out of it, but if you notice that your audience is going to Blue Sky, then learn how to use Blue Sky and start building an audience there. Or even LinkedIn can be an amazing social media platform for reach right now. In fact, I would argue it's probably the most stable of the social media platforms at the moment. I would definitely consider LinkedIn as part of your social media strategy if your audience is there, right? Yeah, so, you know, and that's just from the social media side. Obviously, you know, it's a little different from the press side. If you happen to want to learn how to engage press, you know, a lot of stuff is happening in the press world where, you know, there's outlets that are getting shut down left and right. But you know, that's part of just, you need to stay on top of the news and realize who's writing about indie games or student games. Those are going to be your best targets, your best advocates, and that could include a freelancer as well. So, you know, don't aim for like the big editor. He actually is probably going to be too busy and he won't be able to cover your game. But you know who's going to advocate for you? The freelancer. So, you know, look for a freelancer who loves like the type of genre that you're making a game for, you know, and start developing a pitch and send it his way. And, you know, you might be lucky and he'll want to cover that game and the story, and you can get a lot of eyes on it that way. So there's two approaches there, you know, social media and press. And then I haven't even touched on influencers. That's its own beast, but you can approach influencers in a similar way as, you know, press. Look for the influencers that like covering the type of genre of your game. You know, start with small influencers. They're probably going to be the most likely to cover it. You know, and if you can identify who those people are, start pitching them your game, and they, you know, and then eventually you can build upon that and aim for bigger influencers as you grow your audience. So that would be my like top level advice. I can obviously dive into more. Feel free to talk to me later if you want, and I'll be happy to chat to you about strategy.
Okay, we're going to have a Q&A in just a second, but Wes, I wanted to get your final thoughts on maybe, so procedural content, maybe content generation with Cybever possibly, or if you want to talk about that, or just the way you see the industry shaping where it is right now.
Sure. Well, if I could just add a little bit to that, I learned some tricks when I was doing the Terraria figures, just to bounce to that, and I did a lot with, I ended up calling it trust marketing, which is like when you're developing something like this, which was a lot of different character designs and figures, and it's the same for doing a game, where you might have a lot of content, maybe it's character designs, maybe it's level designs, maybe it's world designs, maybe it's gameplay videos. And with your team or content that you're making yourself, you're usually creating that in batches. But one thing that you can do is hold those batches back and develop like a communications cadence. So maybe you're releasing a drop every week instead of releasing it all at once. Like, here are all of our characters. You release one character per week, and you do it on Fridays or Wednesdays or whatever, and you develop that cadence. And, you know, it's odd to say, but one person who did a really good job of this recently is Dochi. And she did a great job of like training her audience to come back for content on a regular schedule. And you can do the same thing when you're making a video game. And you can drop your character designs on Mondays and your level designs on Wednesdays. And making a video that's a longer form on YouTube on Fridays. Maybe it's a process video about how you use tools. And you know, just develop your content that's specific to each channel, and then develop a schedule, and feel free to like hold that content back so that you've always got something to drop on a specific schedule, and develop that cadence so it's like a drum beat, and you've always got something to, you know, keep people coming back on your schedule. instead of dropping it as soon as it's ready, drop it when you want to. So it's like treat that like content. Treat your marketing like content that's valuable to your audience. And that's the key to transmedia marketing, and just like hold it back because it's valuable to your audience,
This also helps the algorithm. So
Exactly, yeah.
And you're going to be, if you're doing the social media game, you're doing the algorithm game. So.
Yeah, because you're not even just training people anymore. You're training robots. You're training algorithms to replicate and know that this is something that's worth pushing out and doing over. Basically, you need to brainwash your audience. Operant conditioning.
And what you're doing is you're trying to get people to trust that you're going to release your game on time, you're going to support it post-release, you're getting people to wish list it, and the way that you build that trust is you tell them every week we're going to have new content for you. There's a game called Operation Doorstop, and this guy, he's brilliant what he's doing. He's an influencer himself, but he's developing this game, and he's got 4 million people watching his YouTube. And what he's done is he's generated a Python script that pulls the new content. As he updates his game, the YouTube script pulls out and makes videos of his new content updates and automatically updates his YouTube channel. So he's got daily updates. So he's developing his cadence like that. It's like an automatic updater that he's written. That's pretty brilliant. But he's developed a huge audience by doing that.
We are also kind of in the age of the devlog. That's what I tend to refer to it as. I mean, this kind of started technically several years ago, but I think it's become more and more standard now that your audience really loves being part of the process, or at least feeling like they are. And in a world in the AAA industry for the longest time, it was all very closed. Developers didn't really talk about the content I'm making right now. It wasn't as personal. And then one of the upsides of social media is all of that is exposed to everyone at all times now. So you can take advantage of that. There are plenty of game developers on TikTok right now that do essentially daily content uploads, and they're like a solo dev doing 3 separate jobs. And it doesn't even have to be that big. They're not even making that big of a game, but it's intoxicating. People really like being able to see oh, I made this model today, and they get to see progress they normally aren't able to see. And it's a small thing, but people really like that. And you can build an entire audience based on just feeling like you're on ground zero.
Wow, I love this group of people. They're so in tune with how effective PR works. I love it. And marketing.
And shout out to William. Is William here? Hope he doesn't mind that I'm sharing this. But he was posting his cool stuff up on LinkedIn, and he got spotted, and now he's on 80 level. So, I mean, right there, it goes to show that people are watching your stuff, right? So post your cool stuff. Cool people will see it, and they'll put it up, right? And spread it around. So, okay. You good for questions for a few minutes?
Yeah, please repeat the questions from the audience.
So we'll repeat your question. Okay, let's see, go ahead, yes, start over here.
Y'all talked about YouTube devlogs, which obviously take a lot of sort of work to kind of create it to a professional standard, but I've also seen a lot of coffee diaries and kind of a little bit older school, but doing a regular blog. Do you think that Steam coffee diaries or those sort of forms of keeping your audience up to date are as effective, and how often do you think you should use those, and how long do you keep them, keep the content that you put in to it, you know what I mean? Do you do a paragraph, or do you do a whole, Bible of what's going on?
Okay, so Steam coffee updates, how long and how often?
Yeah.
I can kind of speak for this because I used to own an indie company, and we had to do basically that, teaching ourselves how to do the whole repetitive devlog thing. We did it on Steam as well before we called it that, but I've reflected on it over the years, and we definitely weren't perfect at it. But I would say, as a piece of advice now, is be aware of what you're good at and lean in on that. If you are highly technical and you have, basically talk about what you're passionate about. Passion is infectious, even if you're on a technical level, it's not something that's readily accessible to everybody. It doesn't really matter if they understand it, it matters if they feel something. That's really what it comes down to. Like, we had devlogs talking about like different systems that we were making in the abstract, without spoiling things, of course, but like that there's a middle ground between like it sounding like a dissertation versus like, oh, this is a pretty cool thing that you made, and like here's a piece of it that we can all digest together. And I think it's like kind of like what you said before. Consistency really is the key. Like, it doesn't matter how good your devlogs are if no one knows when they're coming out, because it's not really the content of the devlog itself is what people are looking for. They're looking for normalcy. They're looking for consistency. They want to know that you're going to be there, and they want to know that they are part of it. And daily bite-sized pieces, and that could be a paragraph, that could be whatever. It depends on what you're talking about. You focus on what interests you the most, because you'll write the best content for that. Then it would be like an artist talking about, well, I tried to teach myself Python today. Like, focus on what you're good at is what I would say.
I think it also can boil down to where your audience is. One of your questions was, should you focus on Steam or YouTube, right? If you notice you're getting more engagement from Steam, it's fine to focus more on posting out Steam devlogs if that's where your audience is, right? I don't feel like you have to be beholden to doing YouTube content if you're not getting any mileage out of it. Put your resources where it's working. At the same time, I do think, even though like the Steam devlog may allow you to post long form content, like maybe it's more acceptable there, I do think overall the attention span of people is very short. So the more readable you can make it, the more digestible you can make it, the better. I wouldn't necessarily, like, the only people who are going to really dive into like a book of information are going to be like your super hardcore fans, but those are the fans you already won over. So if you're trying to expand your audience, I think short form or like shorter form content is the way to go. You're going to get the most mileage out of that.
Okay, all right.
And I would just add, keep it authentic and in your voice. Like, don't try to spend extra time being. If you're not a professional writer, don't make it overly professional. Don't try to write it like a press release. Don't run it through ChatGPT.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to make it slick. Keep it authentic. Don't introduce typos or anything like that. But keep it authentic. Keep it in your voice. Make it sound like it's from you and from your creative point of view, from your editorial voice. And don't use tools. Don't use AI.
Yeah, people have a sixth sense for that sort of thing. You have to be really careful about it. Like, it might sound good, like professional, but people's like, that sounds like corporate drivel. And gamers have gotten real good at spotting that, and you don't need to be emulating that right now.
That sounds like ChatGPT.
Yes.
Randall, go ahead.
Okay. So my question is, I know you guys talked about earlier about I was also at GDC, so I had a lot of the same things you guys had about like motion capture being an AI and everything like that. But my thing is when the main talks I mentioned that was helpful was when the Discord talks about how they were setting up this new system about letting the actual fans getting involved with the actual development process and actually getting more into that and actually helping them with getting the fans involved with like the lore, actually interacting with some of the characters, to like creating bots that are based off of the characters. So this is more for the experts. Like, what are you guys' opinion on like that type of interaction and that type of advertisement and marketing for like games, for like professional indie games, like, or even like AAA games?
Could you repeat the question, just to make sure I understand?
Sorry. So my question is, how do you feel about Discord's new system they're trying to introduce with like marketing and getting like the fans more involved with the intellectual property as it's being like released? So, that's my question.
So from what I understand, like the fan first like marketing approach, you're wondering if this is an effective technique. I think it well, for a student game, for like an indie game, I think first of all you need to build that audience first and get those fans. So I think that's something that you shouldn't really be considering until you develop the community for it. Obviously, for the bigger games I worked on, like Pokémon and Mario, those are very effective techniques. They have like they have a global audience, right? So the fan first marketing, I think, is very effective for them. But for a game that still needs discoverability, I don't think not so much. That's something that you should probably think about later down the road once you have built that audience.
Yeah, because if you focus all of your effort on creating a character in your personal property that you can chat with and no one cares about the property, then I guess like you need to do one of those things before the other, effectively.
Okay, so we'll do one more question. I want it from the back this time. Someone back. Okay, we'll go. Yeah.
My name's Cyrus Harden. I've been making games by myself since I was 10, and eventually I decided I wanted to put it on YouTube. So I started making it, and I got a couple thousand subscribers. And so eventually I made this one devlog on this game. It was like a horror game, and people really liked it. So I got all these people on my itch.io page, and they were playing it and making YouTube videos about it. But then I started to think, like, I want to make money off of this, and I have these games, and I know I can make them, but I don't know how to price them, and I don't know where to look for how to price them. Like, is it game length? Is it replayability? Is it, I don't even know where to start when thinking about that.
Okay, interesting question. So, thoughts?
From the indie space, pricing is a constant moving target and it's changing with the times. But since there's no like book on video game pricing, and actually the book is being actively written as we speak and rewritten, unfortunately, you kind of compare to the ecosystem around you. Like if you're indie, playtime is one way of doing it. It's not usually always the best way because there are really short games that are worth $20, I think. But there's also games of the same length that I wouldn't pay any money for. Like it's kind of agnostic from quality, essentially. So like, think about whether you're indie. I think a good question to ask is like, if you have a price point in your head, think of other games with that price point and think, would I spend that much money for this sort of thing? And it doesn't have to be self-deprecating or anything. It's like kind of like a realistic thing. You could look at like Outer Wilds is like $20. Outer Wilds is an amazing game. That's a fairly decent upscaled indie studio made that game. They charge about 20, I think maybe 30 on release. I don't know if they ever fully gave it the full 60. But like also it's a shorter game. It's a smaller scale. So that's kind of a point of comparison. There's also games that are $5 that, people will pay a lot more for a game that seems fair. And don't be afraid to shoot low, like 10, 15. There's a whole list on Steam of just like $10, $15 games. People tend to be also a lot more forgiving of newer titles when they're like, I just spent like $10, it's fine, or like $5. Like they're willing to forgive a lot for $5. But like if you say like start pricing yourself at 30, well now you're saying you're half of a AAA game, or at least used to be. Now it's like a third of a AAA game. So you have to keep that in mind. I always like to compare around me.
Something I saw at GDC that I thought was really cool was in the indie game space, after you played their game and they'd give you a survey, a couple of them asked, how much would you be willing to spend to play this full game on Steam? And so then you have that database to look at.
Yeah,
See, they don't know either.
And you can do research on Steam games. You can look at their backs. I mean, have you done that? Have you gone through and looked at the numbers on Steam games and just tried to find, especially like how much they're selling and when they drop their prices, and just watch where the spikes hit and the type of game that it is?
I looked at a couple, but it was mainly games that I had played. So I was wondering if there was like a place where I could look where it was like a bank of like modern games, or like somewhere. If not, someone should make that where it takes
Like Steam charts?
Yeah, like Steam charts. Oh wait.
Steam Analytics is pretty good for that. Like you can look by genre. I think that's a pretty good place to start, and kind of look things that are around the price point that you think it should be, and look at what games are there. And if if your stomach turns by looking at that, it's like, ooh, that makes me feel bad, then listen to that feeling. But if it seems like I could probably do that, like I would pay money for that, then that's not a bad place to start. And it's not an exact science, but neither is any of this. So.
An interesting approach would be possibly, taking a PR stance on this and doing an audit, do some case studies on some games that, like the games you did look up, and see how successful they were with that price point. And you could leverage that data to make a decision on how to sell your games to and what price point they should be at.
Okay, and I think that's all the time we have. So we have other things we need to do this evening, right, Andrew?
Yep.
So
Great
we want to
panel.
thank you, panel.